Hello, everybody. So excited to see everybody calling in from all over. We got people coming in from South Africa, Portugal, UK, and all around the United States. It's really great to see everybody. Grace and I have so much stuff that we want to cover. So let's just jump right in. The new webinar playbook, tips and strategies for 2024. Hello, I just want to say my name is Sam Balter. I head up content here at Wistia. If you don't know Wistia, we're an all-in-one video platform that helps you host, analyze, and create your videos. And I'm joined today by Grace Cheung. Grace. Oh, I think you're muted, Grace.
What a classic webinar moment. Hey everyone, I'm Grace. I'm the head of marketing here at Lumen 5. If you don't know us, we're a video creation platform that helps your team make everyday video cost efficiently, make sure it's well designed, and stays on brand.
Awesome. And just so everybody knows, anybody who's tuning in, yes, there will be a recording that you'll get afterwards. We're going to do a Q&A at the end of this session. And then if you have any other question outside of this, you can always reach out to Grace or I over LinkedIn. Happy to answer any questions that you might have. So let's get started. Webinars today. Now, I just want to take a moment to talk about how are people feeling about webinars today? So a little bit of data that I think is really helpful. This is from a recent report by Hublio on the state of webinars. And when they asked people, how are you feeling about your webinar content? 40% of people said they love it. And I really like to see this because marketers are often really hard on themselves. So it's great to see such a large chunk of people who are really into and involved in their webinar content. And they love it. 50% of people surveyed said it's just all right. It's kind of meh. It's nothing special. Could use a little bit more work to it. And 9% said that it's not so good. And now the thing with webinars is basically we also host them quite frequently. So I'd love to just quickly survey the audience here for a second to see how are you feeling about webinars? So if you look over here into this poll, there should be a poll just over, launching on the side in the chat window. And if you could just answer how frequently are you hosting your webinars today? Okay, so no set schedule, some people quarterly. Yeah, wow, really great to see these results coming in. A lot of people on the week, wow, a lot of weekly webinars, which is really awesome. This is really fun to see as these results come in, how people are doing. And it's just a good way to gauge how we're generally feeling about it. So I'm going to just let this run for just a second longer because I like watching the little bars move around and it's super fun. Okay, so this gives us kind of a good sense of where we're at as a team. So I'm going to just remove this guy from the stage and then go back to sharing my screen here. We also ran this survey basically for our state of video report. And we did this earlier in the year, and we asked, how often does your company make live events? And I think one of the things that really stood out was 45% of people are making them monthly. 18% of people were making them weekly. 21% quarterly, and 16% had no set schedule. So definitely you can see that a lot of companies, a lot of people out there, over 60% are making at least a webinar a month. And I think it's really important because webinars are not only frequently occurring, but they're a frequently occurring long form piece of content. So they're really, really important for a lot of different things, whether that's top of funnel brand awareness or customer demos or any kind of things along that. Webinars serve a lot of different purposes. But we're noticing when I talk to marketers and that there are a few common issues. Webinar registration is kind of dwindling. Webinar engagement can kind of be a little bit stagnant. And this one I think comes up pretty frequently. Webinars are sometimes disconnected from the rest of your marketing efforts. So I know this is just, if one of these stands out to you, like 1, 2, or 3, just drop it in the chat of which one is probably which one is the more common problem that you're running into. Cool. So I'm just going to see these moving forward. Okay, awesome. So a lot of these issues have Grace and I kind of rethinking our webinar strategy, right? We're trying to think of how we can make our webinars better. And so we've tried a few things. We've altered our promotion strategy to move beyond just email and expand into paid ads and video. And we've started using pre-recorded content to make webinars a little bit more engaging. And then we've both done a lot to distribute post-event content beyond just the landing page and the recording. Now, I think there are a lot of marketers out there who would look at this and say like, okay, great, these are good strategies. You were able to make your webinars better by investing more time and more money into them. But a lot of marketers probably have this question: how do you invest more time and money when you barely have any time and money as it is? This is from an upcoming State of Discontent report about kind of issues that marketers and content are running into. And the number one issue that people face is a lack of resources. So Grace and I are trying to offer some advice that we can go with that basically doesn't involve a lot of resources. So in this webinar, we want to show you how to use AI to narrow the skill gap and produce content more effectively. We want to talk about different promotion techniques that will help you get more out of your existing webinars. And we want to do things for how you can expand post-event contribution without a ton of work. So I'm going to turn it over to Grace now to talk about some of the things for webinar promotion.
Hello again. Yeah, so let's get right into it. Next slide, please. I think one of the most common complaints that people have, like Sam said, is that webinars just take a lot of time and energy. And previously, I don't know if it's the same for you guys, but it often felt like there wasn't enough of a connection between the webinars that we're running and our revenue or KPI goals. The connection just kind of seemed really vague and ambiguous. So we're going to start talking right away about how marketers can alleviate those issues. So first, I kind of want to hear from everyone here. How long are you actually spending on average to produce a webinar? I'll let this run for a second here. I am baffled and shocked that the first answer is 1 to 2 weeks, because that is not the case for us here at Lumen 5. We spend 4 to 6 weeks doing webinars. Okay, it's evening out a little bit now, so that makes me feel a little bit better about how much time we're spending on it. I'll let this run for a second. Looks like it's a bit of a battle, but 4 to 8 weeks is definitely winning here. And that is definitely closer to my experience with webinars over the last bunch of years. I think it's really important for us to recognize here, if most of us are running webinars once a month, and it takes us 4 to 8 weeks to run a webinar, I don't know how many 8-week periods you guys have in a month, but mine looks closer to 4 weeks. So that is a lot of time. When we're feeling that time crunch, like most marketers do, it's a very unfortunate side effect. That's why the work we produce can become there or kind of feel mediocre. Next slide, please. So the elephant in the room, it's AI. So earlier this year, Lumen 5 ran a survey around how marketers are using AI in the workplace. I think AI often comes up as a solution when we're talking about how marketers just don't have time, don't have bandwidth, don't have the skills required to run things like webinars consistently and all the time. Unsurprisingly, in this report, which we are going to be sending a link to that in the chat, 40% of marketers are using AI in their day-to-day, and most of them say that the number one use is content creation. It's a very common solution to the resource recession that a lot of teams are in. I think we all know there's a lot of discourse and discussion about it, but for now, at least, it does feel like AI is sort of here to stay. So it's kind of important for us as marketers to understand how we can use it effectively, because AI is so good at creating really mediocre content. So when we're talking about webinars, how can it possibly make our webinars better? Next slide, please. So I kind of spoke to our head of AI here at Lumen 5, Chris, to talk a little bit about what using AI for content creation can really mean. So we can go ahead and play that.
I'm Chris, head of AI at Lumen 5. AI's capabilities have changed in the last few years. It has become very good at synthesizing content into something new. Generative models can create text, images, video, and audio. The possibilities feel endless. But creating good content with AI is about leveraging it to uplift your team. At Lumen 5, for example, we help marketers reach a wider audience by transforming their content into video. This has impact on brand recognition, global organizational cohesion, and creates more content in revenue-driving channels. Proper implementation of AI can lead to improved ROI and efficiency. AI as a tool can reduce the technical skill gap, leveling up your team and leading to better business outcomes. While there are risks and limitations, the use of generative AI is becoming more prevalent across the board. Teams that stand out will be the ones who choose to use it wisely, focusing on high quality rather than high quantity of content.
Right, so like Chris says, it's about quality over quantity. So next slide, please. I would like us to think about that in the sense of what we're outsourcing to AI is the boring parts. There is a quote out there about AI content and how it becomes apparent so quickly when writing or art is created without that human experience. And if we kind of think about it, that is the fun part about being a marketer. My team recently sent out an email with a demure and mindful meme. I don't know if any of you are aware of that, but that gave us all a little giggle. And I would think we can admit that AI is not necessarily going to be able to do that, to pull from shared cultural experiences and create that connection right away. So using AI to automate the boring parts kind of takes that pressure off of your team and lets them leverage their curiosity, their expertise, and of course that human experience. Next slide, please. So what do I kind of mean when I'm talking about the boring parts? So I'll give you some examples of how we use AI here at Lumen 5. What it kind of means is you've already got your content. Maybe you've written the entire webinar script and you need to make it into a shorter script because you're making a promotional video clip. AI can do that. You can upload that draft and ask it to summarize it for you or summarize a part of it for you. You can use it to create multiple hooks for a draft that you've written to use on social media. My favorite way is actually using a language learning model like ChatGPT to kind of proofread your content. So you can go to ChatGPT, you can say, hey, I'm a marketer, I'm writing a webinar, you are an audience member, you care about X, Y, Z. What feedback would you give me based on that? Kind of copy paste your draft in it. It'll read that piece for you and give you feedback that can help with your next draft. So I find that really, really useful as a first pass. I think writing can get really stuck in your own head. It's helpful to have a robot kind of objectively tell you what this piece is or isn't accomplishing. We have written a blog with more guidance on how you can use things like ChatGPT to elevate the stuff that you're already creating. We'll share that link in the chat as well. Next slide. So this next one is sort of something that webinars we should kind of think about in general, but when you are strapped for resources, it could be really helpful to kind of think about the purpose of your webinar, what you're trying to accomplish with it, and then focus your team on the things that'll actually align with the goals and matter the most. I actually saw a question already in Q&A about what team owns webinars, and I'm going to jump a little bit ahead of this webinar itself and let you know it kind of depends what that webinar is trying to do. Next slide. So thank you, Sam and Wistia, for letting me borrow this chart. So Wistia's State of Video report tells us that there's a couple of major reasons why we webinar. So depending on what your webinar falls under, you need to tailor your approach towards not only the promotion, but the content creation, the goal setting, what team owns it. Next slide, please. For example, our recent webinar, New Ways to Make a Video, was product focused. Our target audience was really our own users. So yes, we did repurpose some things and nominally promote on external channels like social media, but more important to us was specifically targeting our own email database of users, both active and inactive, as well as placing assets in-app to promote this content because the people that we wanted to care about it were most likely in that place. Next slide. Meanwhile, earlier this year, we ran an AI-focused webinar. This was more about lead generation and capturing that new audience, so external efforts were a lot more important. This impacted how we approached post-show nurture and engagement, and it gave our team incentive to go talk to our sales team about what conversion looks like. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But the essential takeaway here is even when you're thinking about who's owning what we have to do, and how do we have time to do all of those things, I don't want to take a step back and think about why you're webinaring in the first place and go from there. Next slide. Which ties into this. No matter what the goal is, you kind of need to promote your webinar across the channels that make the most sense for it. This is where leveraging your understanding of your webinar goals, as well as leveraging AI to help your team, will give you that bandwidth and those resources to promote and create better content. So really good example. Sam's going to talk later about pre-recorded content and how recording some parts of your webinar can be really helpful. So before we start, this is a little promotion video that we made to promote this webinar. And just FYI, there's AI in this. The people are real people. I'll give you that clue. And we actually did film this in office. But let me know if you can spot where the AI is. We can go ahead and play.
In there. Can anybody hear me? Can you type in the chat to make sure you can hear me? Is that working?
I cannot hear you. You're on mute. Mute.
But your webinars should not be looking like this.
Mute. Mute.
If you're part of the 40% of marketers who think their own webinars are just meh, register today to learn how to make your webinars amazing.
Any guesses? It wasn't me. That's not my AI avatar. I am, a real human that filmed this video. If there's no guesses, I'll go ahead and let you know. It's the backgrounds. So we actually filmed each person in office, but we kept production really, really minimal because everyone was filmed in the exact same spot with the exact same lighting. And we just used AI to add the bookshelves, add the painting, and kind of change the background a little bit. The buttons are actually also animated by our in-house team. So this is what I mean when there's kind of a balance between what you need to ask your team to do, because you might have something really specific in mind, because you know that they have the expertise to get you there. But you can line it up so that AI can help you make sure that the production or the effort that goes into it is minimized or allows you to focus on the things that actually matter. So this video took one afternoon of filming. I think this specific video clip in total, we had to pull people when they were in between meetings, but I think it took maybe 45 minutes to film this beginning to end, and then he edited it in like an afternoon. So this type of content, which is easily produced, pre-recorded, can be used everywhere. We use this to promote the webinar everywhere. We use it on email, we use it on social media. We actually also used it on paid ads, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It's a really good way also during the webinar to keep the audience engaged. It gave me a little 30-second break to take a sip of water. Next slide. I think back to you, Sam.
Awesome, Grace. Thank you so much. I love seeing how people are using AI today. So I want to talk a little bit about getting ready for a webinar. And let's just jump right into it. So if you think about the webinars, like generally you have kind of a lot of pre-production work that sits on the beginning. You might use research reports, some thought leadership, some content you have that goes into your webinar script, your webinar visuals, and your promo assets. And then you have the live event. And I want to talk about this space right here, the space right between production and the live event itself, like what you can do to get ready. Now, the first thing you can do to get ready is like think about just the existing relevant media that you have. So like there are basic things that are really helpful to have for a webinar, like things like the countdown clock that you might have seen in the beginning, just to let people know when the webinar is about to start. Or if you have a long webinar, you might use something like a "We'll be right back" video. If it's something bottom of the funnel where you're going to be having like regularly occurring demos or helping customers onboard with new things, you might have customer testimonials or short demo videos. And then if you're doing kind of a big production, like a town hall or something really useful, like big like that, you might use that snazzy brand video or those product videos. So I think a really good place to start for anybody is to think about all of the elements of it that you have in your existing marketing, because you want to make sure that your webinar is utilizing the content that you have that already exists. Now, beyond that, I think one of the things you've seen is you can think about some of the tools that exist today that can help you with audience engagement. So a lot of webinar platforms, including Wistia Live, have these types of tools. Like you can have polls to ask specific questions that gives you valuable data and is informative to the audience. You can use calls to action, so small buttons that appear in the top that send people to research reports or to download or to schedule time or any of these things. Like these calls to actions are really helpful. And then just thinking really thoughtfully about Q&A and how you use and utilize Q&A. Now, one thing I do want to note, though, is when you start thinking about all these webinars, you might only have a small team that can help you. And this is a lot of stuff to keep track of. So one thing that I found in my experience with webinars is it's really helpful to have a run of show doc. And this is just a very simple kind of like, this is the current run of show doc for this webinar right now. And you can see in it, like basically we divided it out as here's all of the relevant links and information. We keep all of the things in a folder, so we have all the content queued up beforehand. And then one of the things you can notice here is you can see like I estimate about the time, the specific action we're going to take, what resource we're going to share, and then what slide it's going to basically appear on. Now, I think this is a really helpful document for people just as something like to borrow, to steal, to take as a way to make sure you're using all of your things and you're keeping track of them as well. So the last thing that I think about before a webinar is basically grading your setup. So this is a tool that came out of Wistia's hackathon recently, and I'm going to try to just do a very quick live demo of it. So we'll see here, and just so you can see basically how this tool works. So if you go here to, we'll drop a link in the chat here. But this is a really handy tool to get some advice on your setup from an outside opinion. So you go here, you can go in and you can say like, I want to grade my setup. It gives you a little bit of information. It consults the Oracle, which is basically, it is a number of different things related to like AI. It has a lot of our best practices built into it. And then it gives you a score, and then it gives you a variety of nice pieces of feedback. So it's like, okay, this is how well your setup is doing. This is how well you're framed, your picture quality. And then it might even give you some nice notes on your background. Like your background is visually appealing with some clean elements like that plant and the camera. So it's very good at picking up these things. I've also tried it within my own house, and it said that my background is messy and a little bit confusing. So definitely something worth trying out. It's a really nice tool. And it's something that can be really useful for anybody who hosts webinars regularly. So now back here to this guy. Awesome. Great. So then going through it, this gives you a little bit of sense of like what you can do right before getting ready to the webinar. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is some of the advantages of using pre-recorded content within your webinar. You've seen Grace and I have both played a little bit of pre-recorded content, and it's been really, really helpful. Now, basically, when you think about the typical webinar process, it looks like this. You put a bunch of time into webinar prep and promotion, getting people, getting speakers, writing scripts. You have the live event, and then you have kind of the clips at the end where you're like doing something with the content, trying to make use out of the content. And using pre-recorded content and building it into this prep and promotion can not only help you a lot with the live event, but it can really significantly improve the kind of performance of clips of the webinar afterwards. So I want to take an example of behind the scenes on our State of Video Live that happened earlier this year. It was a really big production in terms of our webinar, and we used a lot of pre-recorded content to make it happen. Basically, the webinar existed in two parts. There was pre-recorded content that was made up of a number of segments at the beginning, and then a live Q&A. So you can see kind of what the pre-recorded content looks like on the left here with the live Q&A on the right. Now, one of the big things that's really nice about this is we were able to basically take all of these things and kind of borrow a lot of the research report content that fed into the webinar scripts, webinar visuals, and promo assets that we used throughout. And it also helped us with like a lot of like using these clips and different pieces of pre-recorded content in the event. But I want to talk a lot more about this area, what you do with the post-production content. And for us, it's basically I want to talk about kind of an underutilized area, which was what do you do with the full videos? So one of the things we learned was we basically had 3 long form assets that came out of our state of video. We had the live event itself, the on-demand version, and then we took the webinar and we put it on our blog. We also added calls to action within this video that would direct people to download the full report. So this then became like a lead gen engine in itself. When you look at the performance of these assets over time, you'll notice that within the first week, basically the vast majority of views on the content are coming from the live event. A large chunk of them are coming immediately from people following up on the event, and a very small portion of the views are from people who looked at it on the blog. But as time goes on, the on-demand assets really start to surpass the live event itself. So by the first month, over half of the views for the webinar were actually coming from on-demand. And so when you're making a lot of the content, I think thinking about content from an on-demand perspective is really, really helpful. You can just see it another way like this. You can see the webinar views over time. So, and here's some examples from what that looks like on social. Now, I want to turn it back over to Grace to talk a little bit more about how you can use how you can use webinar content on social.
Hello. Yeah, so I call this section Making Your Webinars Live Forever. And to Sam's point, a lot of times we find that the assets you're creating adjacent to the webinar might end up outperforming the actual live event. And that's something that we consider really important here at Lumen 5 because we have a small team. It takes a lot of bandwidth and effort, like we've kind of covered, to make a webinar. So making sure that that webinar is going to continue to have an impact and continue to demonstrate its effectiveness is really important to us to be able to keep making webinars. And we particularly use AI to help us with certain parts of that to create those clips to make sure that we're lengthening the length of time that we are able to, to make sure that we can create an impact of our webinars. So yes, next slide, please. So our system looks a little bit like this. It's a little messier than Sam's. We take our pre-recorded content, which is including the full webinar recording, and we make it live across channels for as long as we can. So we'll kind of repurpose it into a blog. We have a Too Long Didn't Watch series where we'll summarize, including this webinar as well. And something that we really particularly like to do is take that big webinar and cut it into shorter video clips to go on social, which in turn can go into an email. You can embed it back into a blog. You can post it multiple times. So this is sort of our life cycle of a webinar. You can see how one really bandwidth heavy piece can expand its reach over time across social, across blog, and across email. And of course, we actually also use webinars to make short clips for sales, which they use to engage prospects or to highlight certain things with our customers. They're really great because they're attention grabbing. A lot of times when you're talking to higher level executives or C-level or decision makers, they're maybe not necessarily interested in watching a 45-minute webinar, but maybe, for example, you had a 1-minute clip from your head of AI that you can cut out and send it over to them. Next slide. So Wistia also actually does this. If you hosted your webinar on Wistia afterwards, you can actually go and ask it to find highlights in your video and cut those out. So then you have a little clip that you can use. Next slide. And once you have that little clip, what a wonderful partnership between Wistia and Lumen 5. You can then actually use other programs to jazz up that clip. We're going to go ahead and play this video, please.
Show you how to make a video in 1 minute.
I think what AI is going to let marketers do is go deep on a lot more things. So, for example, if you're a marketer who's a great writer, but you're not so great at video editing, you could use a tool like Lumen 5 to make videos. I think you're going to see a lot more block-shaped marketers and a lot less T-shaped marketers in the next couple of years.
So that clip actually is from our AI webinar that we ran on Wistia at the beginning of the year. We pulled out a little highlight, jazzed it up, and now it lives on social as well. So software like this and AI like this can give your marketing team the power and ability to create the specific assets that they need for whatever channel that they're looking to use. And it makes your brand team happy because it stays on brand and it looks nice. Next slide. So I wanted to give a little bit of a wrap up of what we're really talking about. When we're talking about webinars, take a lot of time to do, and we don't often have an easy time connecting them to our goals. The two major aspects that I really want us to take away from today is that video content can help drive engagement. The more ways you can create video and the more ways and places that your video can live out on the web, the more engagement you're going to be able to drive. To Sam's point, this sort of content only increases over time after your live event. And the other way is actually what we do here, which is conversion through data. So specifically interesting to us is pull data, Q&A data, and chat data from your live events. So when you're able to identify high intent actions during a webinar and then set up opportunities for your audience members to show that high intent, you can directly make your live webinar events into conversion points. Essentially, we're saying like, hey, if you are on a webinar and you answer a poll in a certain way, that might show us that you have really high intent to learn a little bit more about Wistia, learn a little bit more about Lumen 5. By identifying those people in your data and following up with personalized outreach, either from the marketing or the sales team, you're using your webinars to additionally create that one-to-one dialogue and directly draw a line between the webinar that you created and your overall business and marketing goals. So drive engagement through video and drive conversion through data. And that is our last slide. Sam.
Awesome. Looks like we got a fair amount of questions in the chat. This has been really, I hope this was helpful for people. I hope this was useful information. Thank you so much, Grace, for being on this webinar and sharing some of your experiences. Let's just jump into some of these questions. I'm just going to jump into one that was mentioned earlier. I'm going to add it to the stage here. This is a great question. Basically, what teams should own webinars? We have events, content marketing, and product marketing, and there's no centralized owner of webinars, which makes strategy challenging when each team has different goals / resources. Okay, I can definitely take this on the Wistia side. I'd say like it's good if you're doing everything. We have different teams own different types of webinars. So for example, we have a series called You Have It, Let's Use It, which focuses on our customers, and it's mostly our customer success team running it. I think the main thing that you want to do is each team can have different goals, but as the marketing leader, you want to make sure that everybody is enabled to produce high quality webinars. So like, I think it's fine for multiple teams to have multiple webinar series, but just making sure that you're all using the same software, that you're all in a brand specific event, and that you're all actually making use of each other's content is more important, I'd say, than a centralized owner. I don't know if there's anything that you would add to that on your end, Grace.
No, I totally agree. I think like the teams listed here, I think this question is from Marissa. Marissa, the teams that you list here will often have different goals, and I would recommend leaning into that. And to Sam's point, using the same software, particularly if there's any branding elements that kind of help you all look the same at the end of the day. Because when we're talking about different resources, that can mean different amounts of budget, different number of team members, and hopefully it doesn't necessarily mean different software that you have access to. I think centralizing your tools can be a an effective way to do it, because then it kind of ends up looking the same, whether we're talking about the Sam's production value or branding or general look and feel. People will understand it's
template like the one you showed. We can add a run a show template Google Doc to the follow-up on this webinar. I find them to be really, really useful. I think depending on what works for you, what software you're using, it might vary slightly. But overall, I think just having something where it's very clear, like this is the thing you're going to do at this rough time on the estimated time, and this is the slide you should be paying attention to before you launch it. So I think that one is that's just a quick one. Ooh, this one's good. I'm going to add this as Sage. I like this question. I feel like my target audience has webinar burnout and engagement and registration numbers are down significantly. Has anyone else noticed this and has thoughts about how to fix it? So yeah, if you're in the chat and you feel like registration is struggling, like definitely let us know. I think we both have a lot of opinions of ways you can improve it. We've talked about paid ads, we've talked about social and things like that. I definitely think using anything that makes your webinar stand out, so that's like doing video promotions, like the AI one that Grace shared earlier, is a really great way to help improve that. I also think like potentially just reducing the number of webinars you're hosting is not a bad idea. Just, I know a lot of people get locked into doing like a really regular cadence of webinars, and they're burning their own audience out on it. And so it's something I would definitely be cognizant of saying like, it might be worth more to invest more in fewer webinars that you distribute in more places. But yeah, Grace, I wonder if you have anything else you'd want to add here.
I think that's a great point. I worked at a company that did webinars once a month, and we definitely noticed that when we switched to once a quarter, we saw growth in the registration numbers as well as the number of new people to us. So I think it's definitely worth considering that maybe you're doing too many webinars, but also maybe you just need to change up the genre of the webinar. So for example, switching from an educational focused one to a customer focused one, you can share a customer win story. People tend to really like those. And I think to some of the things that we've talked about too, pre-recorded content and reusing existing webinar content can also be a good way to re-engage that audience, to kind of remind them like, hey, like, look at this cool clip from a case study. You can sign up for more webinars to learn more in this vein. Can be helpful as well.
Yeah, and I saw also just being mindful of your webinar times. It's really tricky to find a time that works for everybody. Even on this webinar, like having people from South Africa, the UK, and the West Coast, it is difficult to find a good time. I'd say cycle those times, you know, like change, maybe start skewing a couple webinars like slightly later in the evening or earlier in the morning, and see if there's a really time that works for your business and your audience. So Lorelai, I can't really see well. That's a very nice comment in the chat there. Let's see. I'm going to add, this is just a very quick one. How are you guys promoting your blog post? Very simple. I assume this is a question directed at me for basically how we promoted the state of video content, that particular blog post I shared. That is an SEO gold blog post. Like we did promote it through email and through other channels, and we promote it there. But like what we wanted to capture was like a lot of traffic that's relatively passive. And the big test was, could we take this SEO focused blog post that would traditionally just be a lot of text, add a super relevant video to the top of it, and then put CTAs in that video that would drive people to download the full report or to watch the recording in the webinar, or to download the full report or get other pieces of information. So I think like for me on that one, it's not as much as promoting the blog post in a lot of different ways, but it is trying to say like, okay, can you get more out of the SEO blog posts that you have and turn them into some sort of conversion event? So that's that one. This is a super common question. Do you have a recommendation of webinar length? I hate giving this answer, but I feel like it depends. For us, large product ones tend to be longer, tend to be like above 30 minutes. In this one, Grace and I both have a lot of things to say on this topic, and we feel like even narrowing it down to 30 minutes was tricky. We tend to see the longer your webinars, engagement does tend to drop off a little bit. And it's something that's really interesting. But for me, it's like shorter demo things for smaller audiences might be better as short and highly interactive, whereas longer, bigger, brandier ones should probably be like more 30 plus minutes and like less interaction between the audience and the host. But Grace, I don't know if there's anything in your experience that you've run into for webinar length.
I totally agree. I find that the sweet spot is about 45 minutes. 30 can sometimes feel really condensed. 60 is very long. And we find about 45 minutes, people start, like their attention starts to wander, questions start slowing down if they're coming in, chat starts to slow down. So I absolutely do think 45. And I think to your point, Sam, it's sort of like a university course, right? You're going to have like 15, 20 people seminars that only last for 30 minutes because everyone is really engaged, you're getting a lot out of it. And you might have like hour and a half lectures. And that is definitely viable and it's an option. But you also have to make sure that the content that you're putting in there matches that sort of format.
Now, this is a selfish one, but I'm throwing it on the stage because I like it. It's been years since I've been in the Wistia world. Wistia world is great. You should check it out. I love the layout of this webinar. Is this webinar using Wistia webinar tools? Yes, this webinar is hosted on Wistia Live. It's a really great webinar platform that we've been investing like a lot of time and effort in over the last few years. It's really worth checking out if you have any kind of webinar needs or webinar tools. And then we also have like a number of kind of demos or anything like that. But if anybody would like to talk endlessly about Wistia Live or using Wistia Live, like I'm just going to throw my LinkedIn profile in the chat and you could just reach out to me there. Let's see. This one is a good one. Grace, maybe if you don't mind taking this question.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting one. There's a few ways to approach it. We've experimented in the past with actually not telling people it's going to be recorded. If you want to kind of be like, hey, come and find out if it's going to be recorded. But a more useful way we found is actually sending attendance reminders from different platforms and at different times. So we've experimented with like, hey, your webinar is in 2 hours. Hey, your webinar is in 1 hour. Hey, your webinar is in 30 minutes. What we found is that a 30-minute reminder works really, really well. And to also kind of take a look at your spam number. Sometimes automated emails might be going into spam and people don't actually see them. In that case, we actually will use the whatever the webinar platform you're using will tend to have a automated email system. We can send a little note, and then that can kind of sometimes bypass that barrier of they're just actually not receiving your emails in the first place. Content-wise, it's really important, I think, to make sure that the content that you're talking about, the webinar title, as well as the description, are all in line, because otherwise they might sign up and then kind of realize they're not actually interested in hearing about it. And that's kind of when you get really, really high numbers of people who don't come.
Yeah, and I think we found that like the day of reminders are really, really critical. And it's definitely a key piece that's worth experimenting with. And in terms of like looking at the analytics of it, one of the things that we track within Wistia and we pay attention to in sort of like looking at how the webinars are performing is you could see how focused your attendees are. So just like if people are clicking off to another tab or doing something like that. And what we found just from our own experience is that you tend to keep people more engaged and bringing them back when you're actually doing things like polls and engaging the chat. Like it's the polls and things like that, I think are not just useful for us on our end for understanding like what the audience wants, but I do feel like a lot of people get value out of seeing like what other challenges or problems are people running into. So that's a good one. In just a general question that came up earlier, consistent. There's a few of these that are kind of in this area. I'm going to add this one to stage. For the find relevant existing media, I think Grace and I both have opinions this. It's like how are those media used? Are you referring to promotion across channels or the actual live day to repurpose in the webinar? So I think for me, it's like there's two sides of it. You've seen mostly within this webinar Grace and I using videos that we're already existing within our libraries of content. So we're taking like content that we were using either in product demos or on the website or explainer videos or things like that, and bringing them into the webinar. And I think that's probably the first and the easiest step that you could do that anybody could just take advantage of. The second layer of that is for State of Video Live. That content was really specifically built for that webinar and then repurposed afterwards for kind of like State of Video Live, here's some previously on. But Grace, do you have any opinions of like, what is some good, like what are you normally using as pre-recorded content for your webinars?
It is typically stuff we already have. And I think it kind of depends which direction your marketing strategy is coming from. Like if you are using your webinars as kind of the foundation or basis to create those assets for other channels later on, then I would recommend maybe putting in that effort to make that video, to make those videos for your webinars. Because in that case, you're saying the space of my webinar, the bandwidth that I have for the webinar is the origin. And we'll use that for the next 3 or 4 months to cross-promote, to repurpose, to continue telling that story that you started in the webinar. But to Sam's point, if you've already been telling that story, you kind of already have all that messaging out, and the webinar is sort of like a conclusion or like a peak or a valley of that messaging, then absolutely we're looking into our libraries. We're looking into what's been posted on social. We're looking into what people are sending our customers. I think it was, Marissa, your point earlier as well. If you have multiple teams making webinars and you're all on the same page with what the messaging is, it's very, very likely that someone's already made that video that you're looking for to go in the webinar.
Awesome. And then I've gotten I'm going to just run, we're running up on time here. I got 2 questions that are specific to Wistia Live, and I'm just going to flash them across relatively quickly. So I'll just answer them really quick. Can we incorporate the pre-recorded elements directly into the slides itself or somewhere in Wistia Live? So great question. You can obviously, if you're using Google Slides, Keynote, Microsoft PowerPoint, you can incorporate videos directly into those things. For Wistia Live, we moved to a system where you upload the media beforehand. And the big advantage there, I think, is mostly in sharing the sound on your computer. Sometimes it can get like if you have microphones and you're going between where is your audio coming out, it's easier to just use the media that is like already loaded up within Wistia Live. So it makes it a little bit easier. And basically there's just a button at the bottom that says present, and then you just add a piece of content to the stage there. And then this one is a very meta question. Is bringing the written questions on stage a new feature on Wistia Live, or you're just doing some sort of copy and paste? Nope, this is a feature of Wistia Live. Basically, what you are able to do is when questions come in, you see the questions within the backstage area. You can take those questions and then you can just add them to the stage. I think this is a really nice feature because if somebody's tuning out for a second, if somebody's coming back in or whatever, it lets you, like anybody, see the question that's being asked, and then you could address it really specifically, as well as get the name of the person who originally asked that question there. So hopefully this is all very helpful. I think that's pretty much it for all of the questions that we have. I know that both my LinkedIn profile as well as Grace's is in the audience chat. We'll be sending follow-up emails to everybody. I'll make sure to include a template for a run of show doc, as well as a couple other relevant resources. But just want to say thank you so much, Grace, for being here, and thank you everybody else for attending.
Thank you. This is so much fun.
All right. Talk to y'all later. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.